All righty. Evan, good to see you today. How are you?
I'm doing great. My son just graduated from college and I'm feeling good.
Those are significant family milestones, and I'm so glad. I'm hoping you are able to take some time off and celebrate that.
Yeah, we were able to go for the graduation, even though we technically weren't supposed to be there, but we were able to celebrate with him outside of the actual ceremony itself.
That's fantastic. Well, congratulations to you, your son, and the family. Huge milestone.
Thank you.
Excellent. So, Evan, I was always very impressed with what you did with Education Superhighway. So, I wanted to kind of ask you, what was the inspiration? Because I think what you did is just, I find it very inspirational and tremendous, just appreciation for what you did. So, give me a little bit behind the scene. What inspired you to do this?
Yeah, so it was really a culmination of a series of events that happened, but it all started with me, probably 20 years ago, going to a seminar that was all about learning what is your purpose in life. And what I learned at that seminar was that my purpose in life was to be a change maker. And I think that's probably why I've been an entrepreneur 4 times, and always finding problems that I can change the world and really make a difference. And in 2012, or actually 2011, I found myself in a place where I had just left one of my entrepreneurial ventures. I was trying to figure out what to do next. And I decided that it was time to dedicate myself to making a difference. I'd been fortunate enough that I'd had enough success in my business career that I was in a position where I could dedicate 100% of my time to actually creating change in the world. And but I had no idea what I was going to do. And then I read this book called Bold Endeavors by a guy named Felix Rohatyn. And Felix Rohatyn was, one of the giants of the banking industry. He's the guy who saved New York City from bankruptcy back in the 70s. And his book was called Bold Endeavors. And it was really about the importance of infrastructure in changing the face of America.
Yes.
And the book was sort of these 10 vignettes of infrastructure projects like the Erie Canal and the Transcontinental Railroad and rural electrification, and the impact that they had on the country. And what I took away from the book was that every one of those projects was really the result of one person having a crazy vision and
Absolutely.
sort of working on it until the government showed up with the money. And I said, well, that's great. Like, I could see that, I think I could do what those people did. And so I decided to sort of keep my eyes open for an opportunity. And then the next thing that happened was that I was also at the same time thinking about, well, what kind of business might I start to create impact? And I was really interested in ed tech. Because there was a lot of talk at the time, Khan Academy had just come out, and
Right.
there was a lot of talk about how technology in the classroom could change the world. And I'd had a number of conversations with teachers about, ideas that I had for ed tech companies. And every one of them seemed to end the same way, which was with the teacher saying, so are you an educator? And me saying, no. And then them saying, well, probably I can figure out what to do in my classroom on my own. And
Right.
yet, on the other hand, if I walked in and I said, how would you like better internet? They would say, can I get you a cup of coffee? So I knew
Right.
that there was this problem because only 10% of the schools in the nation actually had good internet back in 2012. And yet everybody was counting on technology to change teaching and learning. And so there was this idea of, changing the world via infrastructure. There was this idea of technology being able to change education. And I sort of put 2 and 2 together that there was a gap and maybe I could fill it.
I think that's a great story, and what a worthwhile cause. And as you look at today, how would you describe the current state of education connectivity 8 years later?
Yeah, so 8 years later, we've gone from 10% of schools having good internet in their classrooms to 99.7% of schools having good internet in their classrooms. And what that means is we've connected over 22,000 buildings to high-speed connections like fiber optics. We've put Wi-Fi into basically every classroom in America. And we've lowered the cost of internet access by over 90%, so that schools could afford to buy enough internet access
Absolutely.
that lots of students and teachers could use it at the same time. And, you know, in a way, I don't know if you remember that movie Field of Dreams, where he said, if you build
Yes.
it, they will come. That was kind of our theory. Our theory was, if we build good internet into all the schools and all the classrooms, teachers will start using technology to improve education. And it turns out it worked. And today, 94% of schools prior to the pandemic were using digital learning in at least half their classrooms every week. And, you know, to me, that was incredible. And even more incredible is that almost 90% of teachers were at this point where they said, you know what, technology is making me better at my job and helping me improve teaching and learning. So I want to do more of it. And that was before the pandemic. And then once the pandemic hit, people were like, oh my gosh, it's so good that we made all the progress we made on connecting our schools so that people could start using technology, because now at least we have a running start for dealing with the issue of sending all of our kids home and having to learn remotely.
You know, Evan, this is such a level playing field. When you have a strong internet, the access to information for students is basically keystroke away, right? And in some ways, the opportunities which unfold in front of them, not just learning opportunities, but opportunities for a future career, future profession, networking with others, networking with peers, even in this within the school confinement, it's incredible. So in some ways, for their progress, that one connection becomes such a enabler. And my, you know, when I look at what you have done through this project, is actually in some ways included a vast majority of students and really enabled the digital inclusion. And hopefully, because of that, so many lives have changed. So many lives have gone on to build a career, build a future. So tremendous, tremendous contribution.
Yeah, we always thought of this as being the great leveler, right? As just as you say, it levels the playing field. It gives every student equal access to educational opportunity, no matter where they live. Because now, you know, if you're a kid in rural America who doesn't have a AP physics class, you can get an AP physics class. If, you know, if you're living in, you know, the inner city somewhere and don't have access to, you know, museums and things, like, you can do field trips to museums, you know, and the list goes on and we can personalize. What we know is that students are more engaged in their learning when there's technology involved. We know that teachers have more information about the students so they can customize the learning for them. And we know that the internet gives people the opportunity to learn in the way that's most suited to them, because not every kid learns the same way. But unfortunately, it's really, before the internet, really hard for teachers to teach in multiple different ways the same material. So the potential is incredible. We're already seeing the benefits of it. And, you know, I just think, though, we're still in the early innings, and there's a lot more to come in terms of this really creating equal access to educational opportunities.
Yes. Based on your experience, what were some of the best practices which worked, and what were some of the things people should avoid? Especially, there are many countries, there are many communities, they need to replicate this model. They need to learn from this experiment. What would you say are some good practices and some things to avoid?
Yeah. So I think one of the most, one of the practices that we saw be really, really impactful was leveraging the internet in order to do more frequent assessment of who's understanding the material and who's not. And the best example, people talk about formative and summative testing. So summative testing is the big test at the end of the year. How did you learn everything you were supposed to learn?
Right.
Formative testing is like that weekly quiz or whatever that lets the teacher know if you're picking up the material in closer to real time. But what the internet does, what technology does, is it actually lets you make it real time. And do a lot more quick assessments to see who got it. My favorite example that I ever ran into of this was one day I visited an 8th grade math classroom, and the teacher started the class. Everyone had an iPad, and the teacher started the class by saying, "Okay, I've put a problem on your iPad. Go ahead and do it." And the problem was based on the previous night's homework. And after like a minute and a half, and they did the problem on their iPad, and then they submitted it. And after about a minute and a half, the teacher got up from his desk and started walking around the room. And I was like, what's going on here? And what I realized was he was walking over to the kids who hadn't submitted the problem yet, because he knew that those kids didn't understand the material, and he was getting some more information about what were they struggling with the problem. He then went back to his desk and said, okay, let's walk through the problem. And now let's review these two things that clearly some people didn't get. So to me, leveraging technology and the internet in a way that allows you to get that kind of real-time information about who's comprehending the material is probably the best practice that I've seen. Another really good thing, though, is being able to keep students engaged by enabling them to go at their own pace. And that could mean kids who are getting the material really quickly, moving ahead, getting more challenge, but also kids who are struggling, being able to potentially, maybe you're an audio learner, not a visual learner, or maybe you need to learn through some sort of project as opposed to more traditional ways. The internet enables teachers, as I was talking about before, to be able to do multiple ways of teaching and leverage resources on the internet like Khan Academy and other things that allow them to do that. So, and then the third thing I would say that has been one of the real breakthroughs, especially this year with the pandemic, has been breaking things into small bite-sized pieces and teaching things in small units and then letting people practice after, right? That makes a lot of sense, but again, really hard to do when you've got a teacher in front of 25 kids with no other tools. In terms of the things that don't make a lot of sense, what doesn't make a lot of sense is what I'll call kill and drill, right? Or drill and kill, or whatever the word is. But, it's essentially, you're just using the technology to say, like, go do a whole bunch of problems and then do some more problems. Students don't find that engaging. They don't learn more for it. And more importantly, it doesn't give the teacher any additional information about what's happening. So we need to leverage the internet for what the internet's great at. And one of the things it's great at is sharing information so that, people can know more about each other.
Absolutely. And, as we use technology, as we bring simulation, multimedia, videos, the learning power increases significantly because visual motion explains sometimes complex topics a lot more effectively than reading a text. So I think that multimedia supplementing the text, supplementing the education is a very powerful weapon. And everyone learns in
not only does it help explain it more effectively, but there's a tremendous amount of evidence that it keeps kids more engaged, right? And if all technology did was increase the engagement of students in their learning, it would be a win.
Absolutely. Now, in order to deliver that performant broadband, affordable broadband, there are many solutions, there are many technologies. So it's not one solution fit all. It's actually many different solutions kind of cater to a different environment of a different set of problems in connectivity. So share with me a couple of key solutions you use to deliver that affordability. It's not just performance, is you have to give the full package of reliability and performance, yet it has to be a fairly affordable solution. So what different solutions did you use to deliver that?
Yeah, so at the school level, which I think is a little bit different than the home level, but at the school level, in general, most schools wanted to have a fiber optic connection into the building and then Wi-Fi to distribute it throughout the building. But there were definitely places where fiber optic connections were not affordable, and so remote rural areas. Not even necessarily super remote rural areas, but areas where there wasn't fiber optic plant and it was going to cost millions of dollars to get it there, if you could get it there at all. So in those cases, we used wireless solutions to bring high capacity internet circuits to those buildings, and then once again, redistribute them throughout the buildings. But then there were some places where we couldn't even use wireless connectivity, point-to-point wireless, microwave, those kinds of things. And in some really remote places, we had to use satellite technology to actually bring internet access to those schools. So it was really whatever was the best, most cost-effective solution was the one that we wanted to deploy.
Absolutely. The progress which was made in those 8 years, I think that was very crucial for handling this COVID crisis. Imagine if that connectivity was not there, how tough the situation would be. But during the COVID crisis, last 15 months, did you find some gaps or some key things which emerged, which over the next 4 or 5 years we should be taking care of?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest gap was that when we sent our kids home in March of last year, it turned out that 15 million students didn't have internet access at home. And so here we were getting ready to do remote school for what we thought might be a couple of weeks, and turned out being a year in a lot of places. And 30% of the students in our school system didn't have internet. And that was a huge problem. The other big problem was that a huge percentage of students also didn't have a device. And so we had to get both an internet connection and a device into the hands of students in order to be able to, allow them to attend school remotely. And, the good news is that through a tremendous effort by school districts, by service providers, by device manufacturers, by, governments to provide the funding, we were able to connect 3 million kids in about 8 months, which, at any other time, and just to put it in perspective, in 2019, before the pandemic, the entire internet industry connected 2.5 million households. So in 8 months from a standing start, schools connected 3 million kids. It's unbelievable.
Yeah,
But
that
the
is
problem
fantastic.
is there's still another 12 million kids that still aren't connected. And some of that was funding. Some of that was the availability of internet at their homes. A lot of it was execution and not knowing which kids were and weren't connected. And so that's the work that we need to continue to do. But importantly, we need to do it not just for kids, but we need to do it for the 29 million households that don't have internet. Because the reality is today that the pandemic has shown us, if you don't have good internet at home, you're basically shut out from society. You can't work remotely. You can't send your kids to school. You can't get job training. You can't access telehealth. You can't access government services. I mean, you are really at a disadvantage. And so we as a nation, we need to close the digital divide once and for all now. And the good news is that for the first time ever, I think we have more political will than we've ever had, and hopefully enough political will to actually do the things we need to do to solve this problem.
Yeah, because infrastructure and communications is a lifeline. Internet now is a lifeline. And that's one thing COVID absolutely has shown. And I think there's enough will to really solve this problem. What is a wise way in which you think the government money can be used to address this issue?
Yeah. Well, I think, look, we have to recognize that the digital divide really is composed of two different problems. So one problem is access. And this has been the historical narrative about the digital divide. We need to make sure, we need to build infrastructure into rural America where they don't have access to the internet. And that's true, and we need to spend money on that. But if you look at the 29 million households that don't have internet access, 2/3 of them don't have access, not because they don't have internet, not because there isn't internet available to them, but because they can't afford it. So 20 million of our 29 million households, representing over almost 80 million people, don't have internet access because they can't afford it. And so the second thing the government needs to do is they need to create programs that will help make free broadband available to those folks. And that can be done in a variety of ways. You know, one thing that they've already done is they've created something called the emergency broadband benefit, which was providing a subsidy to people to help them pay for their internet bills. And that's a great solution. But I think that there are actually other really clever solutions that we should be investing in as well, which is, if you think about it, if you go to an airport, there's free Wi-Fi available. So why can't we bring free Wi-Fi to the places that people live by building different kinds of infrastructure,
Yes.
namely putting Wi-Fi networks in places like apartment buildings, low-income apartment buildings where people struggle to afford it?
Absolutely. I think all the things you're describing, technology is reaching a point where the price performance and affordability is converging pretty well, because you also have the right reliability, the right performance, and the latest advances now give that performance. So I think there's a convergence of many factors which will bring this connectivity to those households.
Well, that's right. And you know, we've been doing some pilots in low-income apartment buildings where we've deployed Wi-Fi networks throughout the buildings. And historically, when people have thought about bringing internet into an apartment building, you know, they think about putting a wire into every unit and then putting in a Wi-Fi access point in the unit. Well, that's really expensive. You know, on average, it costs about $1,500 a unit to be able to deploy that way. Well, because the technology has improved so much, what we're finding is you don't have to do that anymore. You can just strategically place Wi-Fi access points down the hallways of buildings, and it works great. The technology is good enough now that it penetrates those walls. People can get high-speed connections in their apartments. And instead of it costing $1,500, the cost drops to something like $200 or $250 a unit. So it's a dramatic change, and people need to start rethinking about things in this way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And a lot of discussion has been around this 100 by 100 type of a performance. Now, in your experience, you know, in different schools, different educational institutions, people accessing applications, what was a typically good performance which you think will give good experience to the end user?
Well, here's the funny thing. When we started in 2012, we said every school building with 500 students and probably 100 teachers needs a 100 by 100 connection in order to use digital learning in the classroom, right? You know, the standard the FCC had was 100 kilobits per student of internet access. So certainly things have changed. When we started, we weren't doing Zoom, and we weren't, you know, a lot of the media rich, bandwidth intensive things. And certainly, you know, a classic, you know, slow DSL line is going to not probably get the job done for a lot of people. But, you know, if you start talking about a connection that's, you know, even, I don't know, 50-10, you probably have a good enough connection to do pretty much everything that you need to do in a home. Now, if you have a home with a lot of people all trying to do it at the same time, sure, you're going to need something better. Look, I'm all for 100 connections into every home, but I'd rather have a connection into every home first.
Right. Absolutely. That's a very basic need and a basic enabler. I totally agree. And as you look at you know, next few years, if we were to say, let's just do top 2-3 things for this broadband connectivity, especially for those households where there's nothing. What would those top 2, 3 things be?
Well, number one, I think we need to create a permanent federal funding source to make broadband free for those who can't afford it. Number two, we need to deploy Wi-Fi infrastructure into the 120,000 apartment buildings that I think is 25% of the digital divide in America. And number three, I think that we need to, continue to build infrastructure out to rural America to make sure that, everyone has access. Those would be the three things that I would do to make the most progress against this problem.
Excellent. Well, Evan, thank you so much for your time. Great ideas, and continue to do great work, excellent contributions, and we will do everything possible to support you strongly. So
well,
thanks for a good conversation.
Appreciate it, and also appreciate all that Cambium has been doing to, both push the frontiers on the technology so that we can do some of the things we're talking about, but also, find ways to, do what you do to make an impact in the world.
Excellent. Thanks, Evan. All the best, and enjoy with family the graduation ceremony and all the celebrations. Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks, Atul.
Take care. Thanks, Evan. Bye-bye.